Good morning, everyone. Maybe good afternoon if you work my schedule, or maybe even good night to some of you that's already put in a full day's work. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Gabrielle Enright with WHIO-TV, and I am pleased to be your host this morning and share in this heartfelt event. I've attended this breakfast before, and I'm honored here to help host it. For over 30 years, Artemis Center has helped more than 100,000 survivors of domestic violence and their children in the journey to safety. October, as you know, is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and today we are all taking a stance against domestic violence together. Take a quick look around the room. You probably know a lot of the people that you're seeing, but did you know that domestic violence affects 1 in 4 women in their lifetime? That's more than breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and lung cancer combined. Domestic violence is also the leading cause of injury to women, more than auto accidents, rape, and muggings combined. Domestic violence does not discriminate. 1 in 7 men will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. Artemis Center believes that domestic violence is a societal problem experienced in our community, and therefore the solution must be community-based. Artemis Center takes a leadership role to collaborate with other service providers, recognizing that domestic violence victims have a bunch of needs. And it was the experience of Artemis founders that victims fleeing domestic violence, in addition to needing a very safe place, also needed advocacy services to help establish safety and regain stability. Imagine being a victim with few supports. Imagine being isolated from your family and friends. Perhaps you have no one but the batterer to provide care for your precious children while you're at work. This happens. 1 in 15 children are exposed to domestic violence each year, and 90% of these children are eyewitnesses to violence. Here are some alarming facts that many of you may know and some of you might not. 5 million children witness domestic violence each year in the United States. 40 million adult Americans grew up living in domestic violence situations, and children from homes with violence are much more likely to experience significant psychological problems, short and long term. Domestic violence in childhood is directly correlated with difficulties learning, lower IQ scores, deficiencies in visual motor skills, and problems with attention and memory. Living with domestic violence significantly alters a child's DNA, aging them prematurely 7 to 10 years. Children in homes with violence are physically abused or seriously neglected at a rate of 1,500% higher than the national average. Those who grow up with domestic violence are 6 times more likely to commit suicide and 50% more likely to abuse drugs and/or alcohol. If you grow up with domestic violence, you're 74% more likely to commit a violent crime against someone else. Children of domestic violence are 3 times more likely to repeat the cycle in adulthood, as growing up with domestic violence is the most significant predictor of whether or not someone will be engaged in domestic violence later in life. The ability to make a difference in the lives of the clients Artemis serves would not be possible without the dedication of their community partners and supporters. We would like to thank all of the table captains. You are amazing ambassadors for Artemis, and your passion and dedication to the Artemis mission is the reason the Great Hall is filled this morning. If you take a look around, there's barely any empty seats. We would like to thank our sponsors, WHIO-TV, Dayton.com, Synchrony Financial, Hauser Asphalt and Concrete, Vela Inc., Midwest Clinical Research Center, Montgomery County, Pickrell Schaefer and Ebling, Carol Wirtz Tire Company, Sinclair Community College, and board patron David and Shirley Yonkin. Please give them a round of applause. And of course, we would also like to recognize past and present board members and Artemis staff, along with the amazing volunteers that have helped make this morning possible. Would all of you please stand and be recognized? I would now like to invite Pastor Mary Riemann to the podium for our invocation.
In the spirit of compassion and commitment that make this gathering possible, I invite you to bow your heads and open your hearts as we pray silently together, each one of us according to our own individual beliefs. Let us begin with a prayer of gratitude for the opportunity we have this morning to play a part in breaking the cycle of domestic violence. In our silence, we pray for those currently living in violent situations. For those working on the front lines with survivors, systems, and social services to break the cycle of violence. For those who have broken free. In our silence, let us offer thanks for the opportunity to serve those who find themselves in our care. And for the food and fellowship we are sharing here today. For these and all the prayers we hold deep in our hearts, we pray. Amen. Jane Kiefer, the Executive Director of Artemis Center, will now share how Artemis Center makes a difference.
Good morning. Thank you all for being with us. I'm Jane Kiefer, and I have the distinct honor to say that I'm the Executive Director of Artemis Center. It is wonderful to see so many individuals who continue to support us year after year. And to the new faces, welcome. We hope that you learn more about Artemis. We really are grateful that you took time today to be with us. A quick history about Artemis Center. We're named after a Greek goddess, the goddess of light and the protector of the vulnerable. Over 30 years ago, we were founded by a group of women who understood the importance of shelter in our community, but knew most victims of domestic violence were in need of supportive services as they navigated their feelings and the unknown. Many of the services we provide today began 30 years ago, holding steadfast to our mission of working with victims of intimate partner violence and their children. Hopefully you've heard, July 1st, Artemis Center began a 24/7 hotline, 461-HELP. We are awarded the county contract to provide crisis intervention around the clock to victims in need. Now, when someone calls in the middle of the night or in the early morning hours, we are able to connect them immediately with services instead of having them call back after 8 in the morning. Callers are directly linked with one of our compassionate and knowledgeable advocates who provide information about the services that they need most. In addition, our hotline serves as a resource to service providers in our community, as well as to family members who may need support as they struggle to help a loved one. We currently provide court accompaniment in 5 municipal courts here in Montgomery County. We help victims fill out civil protection order paperwork. We accompany them to domestic relations court. We can connect the caller with one of our 5 weekly support groups, one which is for women who speak Spanish. We can link them with one of our education groups or with our family therapist for individual or child therapy. Artemis cannot do our work alone. We work collaboratively with numerous organizations in our community, many which are in this room. We have several partnerships with the criminal and civil justice system. We have an advocate who works closely with Montgomery County Children's Services and Care House. Artemis is keenly aware how domestic violence and child abuse can be intertwined, thus the importance of having an advocate at the table when talking about child abuse. We strongly believe when mom gets safe, the children get safe. Lastly, we are in the community by providing a 7-week education group at the Monday Correctional Institution, and we're at Women's Therapeutic Court. To illustrate how Artemis makes a difference, I want to share a story about Amy. The first time we heard about Amy's situation is when her sister called our hotline over the weekend, worried about Amy and her niece and nephew. The advocate was able to provide support to Amy's sister and encouraged her to bring Amy to Artemis as a walk-in. The next day, Amy and her 2 children, along with her sister, showed up at the agency, and Amy was able to meet privately with an advocate to discuss her violent relationship of 4 years. Prior to meeting Amy, the advocate provided the children with snacks and activities to keep them busy during their appointment. The advocate gathered information from Amy to complete a lethality assessment, a tool we use to assess dangerousness of a person on a scale from 0 to 7. Amy scored a 6, which means she was at high risk of injury or possible homicide. Some of the questions, not all, that we ask are, did he threaten to kill you? Do you think he's capable of killing you? Has the violence escalated that other people have witnessed, or is it still behind closed doors? Has he strangled you? Did he use his hands? Did he use an object like an electrical cord? Did he shake you? Are there weapons in the home? Where are those weapons? And do you think the violence is escalating? The answers to the lethality assessment guides the advocate in creating an individualized safety plan. Amy completed the CPO paperwork and then planned on returning to Artemis the following day to go to domestic relations court while the children stayed with her sister. Throughout the visit, Amy's abuser continued to text her messages, ranging from, "Please come home, I want my family back," to, "I'm going to find you and you will pay," to, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I can't live without you," and several others too grotesque to share this early morning. Amy expressed her fear and exhaustion and questioned if she really had the strength to go forward. Her advocate provided support and encouragement and reminded Amy whatever she decided, her decisions would be supported. Amy and her advocate created a safety plan that worked for Amy and her family, and before she left, her advocate gathered toiletries, food, diapers, and wipes, since she had limited resources due to the battering control of the finances. The following day, Amy did come back. She and her advocate walked over to domestic relations court and filed the civil protection order, which was granted. When they returned to the office, Amy signed her children up for therapy and herself her support group. Amy continues to receive services, including court accompaniment to her full hearing, where she had legal representation. Today, Amy continues to attend support group and utilizes the hotline when she's in need of additional support when the days are particularly hard and lonely. Our advocates are true shining examples of compassion and humanity. It is essential to acknowledge how Amy trusted her advocate with her personal story, including the humiliating acts of violence inflicted upon her. The fact that an Artemis advocate was able to sit in her pain, acknowledge the violence, redirect the blame, and offer support is a gift we are all honored to be a part of every day. Artemis truly makes a difference in our community. At this time, I'd just like to encourage you, we have our hotline posters in the back of the room if you'd be willing to take them back to your organization or your agency. And we ask that you hang them in the bathroom stalls. They have shoe cards, and so people can discreetly take the card and call when they're ready or share with somebody that they think might need the card. Today, we have 4 brave and inviting speakers who will tell you more about how domestic violence has impacted their lives and how each of us can play a role in supporting domestic violence victims and breaking the cycle. I would like to introduce Kayla. Kayla is our wonderful family therapist, and she will share about our unique therapy program for children and how we make a difference in our community.
Hi everyone, and thank you for coming out this morning to support us at Artemis. I want to briefly talk about our children's program and what makes us so unique from other programs dedicated to youth in the community. We have been providing therapy for children for about 25 years and consistently serving about 200 children each year, so we know helping children heal from the trauma of domestic violence really is the key to breaking the intergenerational cycle of domestic violence. One unique benefit for children receiving therapy at Artemis is that we do not bill insurance, and our services are completely free. In a typical therapeutic session, the cost usually ranges from about $30 to $150. For providing free services, we are able to eliminate any financial barriers for any families receiving help. Our intake process is as streamlined as possible and is designed to ask specific questions that focus on the effects of domestic violence and how to break that cycle. Breaking the cycle often occurs through the use of specific research therapy-based programs that have been proven to be successful through research-based programs that have been proven to be successful in domestic violence populations, such as trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, parent-child psychotherapy, play therapy, and many more. Another aspect of the Artemis Children's Program is that we focus solely on the effects of trauma and domestic violence that can and often does cause. Sessions do not focus on identifying a diagnosis, but rather on specific behaviors to be addressed in therapy and as well to how to appropriately address said behaviors. We do not label the children that come to Artemis because that label will define and follow them throughout their childhood. The great thing about not having to diagnose or label our children is that they also don't have to take on that role of the diagnosis. They can focus on the trauma and the client's belief about the trauma so they don't develop the unhealthy notion that they cannot succeed in life because they are different and not a quote-unquote normal child. We know the trauma symptoms can dissipate with treatment and healing, and we can focus on what has happened to the child instead of what is wrong with the child. Most importantly, in our therapy sessions, we hold the batterer accountable. We know the unique challenges that confront child as they cope with a loved one who is the abuser. We know the root of their trauma is either having seen or heard the violence occur in their home, disrupting their peaceful environment where they are supposed to be safe and creating chaos in their home. Children learn many ways by watching the abusive behaviors, such as how to manipulate to get their way. Children learn that violence is normal and that violence works. But children are not the problem. The problem is the batterers who have taught children that they are unlovable, that the child deserves the abuse, or even that the child is at fault for the violence in their home. This is what makes my work so unique, because I have extensive specialized domestic violence training and I understand the complex dynamics of domestic violence. With this knowledge, I have the opportunity to provide a safe place where a child can process and heal from the effects of domestic violence and ultimately break the cycle that came before them. I met with a mother who wanted her 9-year-old son to be in therapy. I asked the mom to describe John to me, and she said he was angry all of the time. He did not get along well with others and was getting into trouble at school. When I first met with Johnny, he would not talk about why his mom brought him to Artemis. The only thing I could get him to talk about was video games. Eventually, we built a relationship, and I learned a lot about him. I learned that he believed Minecraft was the greatest game ever invented, that Xbox was so much better than PlayStation in his eyes. And eventually we got to his home life. How he had heard his dad shouting curse words at him and his mom when they thought he was asleep. How Johnny would hear the punches and hear her crying. And when mom was not around, John would be the one who was hit. The session that changed everything was when we explored his dad. How John's dad brought anger, fear, pain, hitting, cursing, and violence, and crying. I asked John if he liked those things, and he said, of course not. So I asked him what he stood for and what his values were. We explored how he believes in happiness, a calm house, safety, having a healthy body, speaking and spreading kindness and joy, laughing and smiling. These are all values that John has. He values his life and his mother's life. We played Uno while talking and discussed how people need to follow the rules and what would happen if they didn't. We explored how this may not have always been a part of his life, how even when John did play by the rules, his dad never cared. It never mattered if the house was completely clean and he still got straight A's. After a few more sessions, John's mother reported he was getting higher grades and was getting along better at school and at home. Recently, John and his mother decided he no longer needed to come to therapy, and as I remind all of my recently graduated clients, Artemis's doors is always open to those who wish to come back. This is what I do in my sessions. We talk about values, play cooperative games, draw and color very scary problems, and then we learn how to get rid of those problems. We name our problems so we can then address and start to heal. Working with people who have come through the doors at Artemis is a privilege and leaves a lasting impression on all of those who know our clients' intimate lives. Our previous therapist, Eric Wolf, testifies this in his poem, Artemis, A Place for Hope. A child of 5 does not know that the nervousness in your eyes is not his fault, or that your bruises are left by lies in a prison built on hope. He just knows that fathers hit mothers. A child of 8 believes that the world is full of superheroes and villains. He thinks he is doomed to do what his father did, that violence and disrespect are what a family makes. A child of 12 goes to her father's to protect her little brother. She holds her thoughts to herself, a rich and secret life. Her father will never know what his anger has caused him to miss. A teen of 15 is just trying to get through a day that is full of family, friends, and fellow students. The people who love her cannot see the shaking in her stomach when she remembers, all those years ago, the way her mother used to scream when her dad beat her mom. A teen of 17 does not eat and is the smartest person in her class. She calls herself stupid and fat, echoes of her stepfather's voice years ago. He didn't hit her, but his words leave a scar that will not fade or be forgotten. These are the stories of the young people who come to Artemis. Lastly, I would just like to say that the Artemis Center's mission statement is leading the community in its commitment to end domestic violence. We fulfill that mission in many ways, and while I am biased, my personal favorite is by helping children know that they are worthy of love, happiness, respect, and safety. We really do break the cycle of violence. Thank you all for joining us this morning in your commitment to end domestic violence in our community.
Thank you, Kayla. It's stories like that that make you understand why we're here. I'd like to welcome everyone that was stuck in the 2 crashes on US 35 westbound. I was myself. I worried a little bit about getting here on time, but we all made it, and there's lots of coffee to go around. We might run just a few minutes over because of that, but we'll keep it moving. The next person I know very well, Major Wendy Stiver. Major Stiver is the commander of the Dayton Police Department's Central Patrol Division. Major Stiver is also an adjunct at Wright State University and teaches graduate courses in applied behavioral sciences to include criminology theory and seminars in race and police shootings, community engagement, and homicide investigations. She's also an avid runner, and I'm glad to see you here in the Dayton area today. Please help me welcome Major Wendy Stiver.
Thank you, Gabby. Before I begin, I just want to say one thing. #MeToo. If you have been personally impacted by interpersonal violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, or somebody you know, a family, friend, loved one, has been impacted personally by domestic violence, sexual assault, interpersonal violence, please stand. It's what we all expected, isn't it? You can have a seat, class. I think one of the things that we're learning this week is that violence impacts all of us, one way or another. And I would like to thank my very good friend Jane Kiefer for all the work that she's done at Artemis and in our community. I also want to apologize to Jane because she has been, we've been talking for the last week or two about preparing a speech for this moment, and Jane really, really wanted me to write something down. I lied. I will tell you this, I did write something down, but as Gabby mentioned, I'm an adjunct instructor at Wright State University, and when I write speeches, I actually tend to write lesson plans. So what I prepared today was a 40-minute class on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, justice, and violence. I hope you guys brought notebooks. There will be a quiz. So with respect to all of you, I'm not going to give you that class. I'm going to give you the same option I give my students. We will cut class short, but you have to write a paper. In all seriousness, I did want to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and justice and domestic violence a little bit. But I also want to talk about the fact that some of my favoritist people, and I did that on purpose, some of my favorite people are right here in this room. And these events are not only an opportunity for us to come together and reinforce our support for organizations like Artemis, but to come together and remind each other that we are all in each other's lives for a purpose. And one of my most favorite people in this room is Chief Richard Beal. I would say that even if he wasn't sitting right back there. One of the things I like about Chief Beal is the fact that when I go to him with my frustrations, when we have problems, that he sprinkles us with little bits of wisdom that neither make us feel better about our problems or solve them. He knows what I'm talking about. To quote Chief, to quote somebody else that Chief has quoted, there are no simple solutions to complex problems. We must learn to be comfortable with discomfort, and we carry these problems around with us, not ignoring them, not allowing them to disappear, in the hopes that we will continue to work harder to find alternative solutions to a lot of the problems our community is facing. And domestic violence is one of those problems. I've known Jane for a few years, and Jane and I actually met on a domestic violence call. As a police officer, I've responded to hundreds, if not thousands, of domestic violence calls. And to give you a little context, being a police officer is kind of like being a door-to-door salesman. A lot of doors get shut in our faces. Sometimes we get chased by the neighborhood dog. And people don't always want what we're selling. And the products we bring to the neighborhood are safety and justice. Back to class. And so one can argue, if you're familiar with Abraham Maslow, in 1943, Mr. Maslow decided to become part of every College 101 class ever in existence for the future of forever. My good friend Mary just told me that she actually didn't go to class that day. I won't tell you which Mary, but she's sitting next to me at that table. Mr. Maslow, Professor Maslow, identified human hierarchy of needs in the form of a pyramid. And the very bottom of that pyramid is our physiological needs, like food, those little quiches on the table. The most important, coffee, Just above that, safety and security, then love and belonging, self-esteem, and self-actualization. Maslow intentionally did not define justice anywhere in that pyramid. And the scholars who followed Maslow for many years argued over where justice might belong in the hierarchy of needs. Some say it's down there around safety and security, and some say it lives in self-actualization. What we know from decades of responding to domestic violence as police officers is that it's very difficult to engage our victims in the concept of justice until we've met their other needs. And that's where Artemis comes in. Our friends at Artemis do a good job of swooping in and helping our victims meet their other needs so they can even begin to think about the more complicated things. If scholars and really smart people couldn't figure out where justice belongs, how do we expect the people who need it the most to understand it any better than we do? And so we need to work together. We need to continue to work together, and we need to work harder to provide those basic needs, the physiological needs, safety and security, love and self-esteem, before we can truly deliver justice. So I want to say thank you again to Jane for all the work you've done with Artemis, for all of the great conversations we've had, for even the times when you call me up and yell at me because you don't think the police got it right this time, and for inviting me to share this story with you. And I want to apologize again for not writing anything down. Class dismissed. Don't forget your homework.
You were supposed to introduce somebody, but that's okay, I'll do it. Because we're friends. It wasn't written down. I thought you said that we often improvise. Didn't you say that during some of your speeches? I'm just kidding. Well, we'll improvise. We are going to introduce Officer Wesley Moan. Officer Moan currently serves on the East Dayton Patrol Operations and has served with Dayton Police Department for just over 5 years.
That is a big picture of me up there. Morning, guys. First, I want to thank Jane for inviting me up here. There's a lot of people out there today. It's a lot bigger than she anticipated. We're going to have a chat later. My name's Wesley Moan. I've been with the City of Dayton Police Department for a little over 5 years, and it was absolutely the best thing I ever did. But I had Jane in my academy class. She came out to discuss domestic violence with us, and she asked if anybody in the class had ever had any experience with the Artemis House. There's Artemis House when I went, Artemis Center now. And I raised my hand. She remembered that for some reason. And she asked me to come share my story, my personal experience with domestic violence and violence in the home. A little bit about me. I born and raised in Dayton, Ohio, my whole life on the east side of Dayton. And during childhood, I was 6 years old when my mom and dad divorced, and when they were together, my dad was never really around. He was mostly the discipline of the household. He always made his presence felt when I messed up, which was often. But my mom was always very supportive of me, and she was kind of my safety net. So when they divorced, my dad left the house. It was just my mom and I. He continued his trend of not being around. Usually only saw me a couple hours on Sunday, every other week. And typically my mother would have to come get me because he was not able to drive me home. So I didn't have a whole lot of male role models in my life until my mom decided she was going to start dating a guy named Pat. And I'm using his real name because he doesn't deserve to be anonymous today. Pat was essentially my hero. He gave me somebody to look up to. Spent a lot of time with me, took me places. We went go-karting, all kinds of cool stuff. I was 7 years old. He was just awesome. I didn't know what it was like to have somebody like that in my life. And that all came to a screeching halt on the wedding night. I remember I had some kind of loose tooth. I was 7. I don't know what was going on. It wouldn't come out. It was painful. I was in tears in the bathroom. He came in and used some expletives that I'm not going to share with you today, and you guys can kind of fill in those blanks. That kind of trend continues. But I remember he put his fist right up against my jaw here and called me a baby and said if I wanted to cry, that he'd make sure that he gave me something to cry about. And that broke my heart. Of course, I started crying more because it was terrible. And that kind of stuff escalated. That night was the start of the terrorizing that he did to me for the next 10 years. A lot of name calling. You're useless. You're a waste of time. I can't believe I spent money on your haircut. I had hair once. I don't know what happened. It's gone. So yeah, it got pretty bad. I remember one night I had a friend over. We were getting ready to watch Saturday night's main event. That's wrestling for all those who don't know. You know, I was 11. I don't know. He told me to take a shower. And apparently I did not sprint fast enough into the shower for his liking. And he grabbed me by that hair. That's probably why it's gone. Drugged me into the bathroom, tossed me into the shower fully clothed. I was screaming, crying. Told me to get my butt in the shower. Again, expletives were there. I won't share those with you. Subsequently, my friend never came back. He was terrified. He called his dad that night, and his dad came and got him. His dad was the best man at their wedding, by the way. So things escalated from there, and my mom got pregnant with my sister, and that was her second child with him, and she was diagnosed with leukemia. So I was 11 years old, and I was at home with this guy with 2 younger siblings, and my mom had to go to Ohio State to get treatment. Luckily enough, my aunt was a perfect match, and that extended her life quite a bit. She was gone for about 8 to 9 months. I didn't see her that entire time. She had to be in isolation. So I got to live at home with Pat during that time frame. Things got a little worse. Usually at the dinner table, when my mom was there, clenched fists, mumbling a lot under the breath, really terrible glares while I was eating. I became an expert in eating very quickly, so I could get out of there as soon as possible. But without her there, it became more direct, more blatant, more loud and in your face. There was no buffer anymore. So I remember calling her and telling her what was going on, and she was powerless. She was in isolation. A cold would have killed her. She had no immune system at that point. When she finally came back, I was elated because it at least slowed down a bit. It wasn't as direct and in your face. But she noticed I was failing, and there's a lady right in the middle there that knows that I don't fail spelling. But I absolutely failed spelling that year. I think I failed 3 other classes my 6th grade year. I didn't do very well at all. My mom was terrified. We had a mountain of bills from the leukemia, continued treatment. She was still very sick when she came home. She didn't know what to do, so she turned to Artemis Center. They had discretion. They didn't charge much. They did charge a little bit back in the day. I think it was $5 for me to go to counseling. But it was something my mom could hide from my stepdad so he wouldn't consider me, useless or a waste of his money. So I did go to Artemis, and for me, it was a place that I could relate my frustrations in a safe environment. I could kind of let it all out to that counselor, just give him that experience that I had, and he wouldn't judge me. He wouldn't call me a baby. He wouldn't press his fist into my chin. So So during that time, it was difficult because he was still living there. And I know that's changed a lot since then. But it was difficult for me to have that safety and then go back into it and have to deal with it. Nothing was ever good enough for that guy. I remember we had 3 huge oak trees in our backyard, and they were gigantic constructs, and fall was a nightmare. It was leaves for days. This was back when we could rake them into the street, and then we could all jump into the pile. It's kind of fantastic. My buddy and I decided we would use a tarp, haul them all out. It was a lot quicker. And after an entire day of raking, I went over to my buddy's house, and we were playing video games. He called over there once he got home from work and made me come home and took me out back and threw me up against the shed. And he held a bag up. It was one of those black trash bags, the yard waste bags. It was about 1/3 to 1/2 of way full with leaves, and told me how useless I was and how big of a waste of time I am, and that he had to re-rake the backyard for that 1/3 bag of leaves. There was a pile the size of a bus on the curb, but just to kind of paint a picture of where I lived at that point. So eventually, after my counseling at Artemis, I know my mother went there as well for some therapy, and she certainly needed it. But eventually we divorced, and I was very happy. My mom finally got rid of him. I was 15, 16 years old when this happened. My younger brother and my younger sister stayed home with my mom and I, and it was great. He was finally out of the house, and I felt relieved. Eventually, my mother got sick again, this time with cervical cancer. And for some reason, he had moved out of the city up to Steubenville, Ohio, which was not far enough for me, but it was at least out of the city. He ended up coming back to try to be part of her life again. And at this point, I'm 26 years old. And he was trying to be my best friend again. It's like he just hit a reset button, like I forgot all the terrible things that he did to me. So one day I humored him, and I asked him, why? What is it about me that you hated so much as a 7-year-old kid, that you had to drag me around by my hair and call me names all day? And his explanation to this day is mind-blowing. I still don't understand it. He told me, well, I was very hurt because I wanted to adopt you, and your dad wouldn't let me. Okay. So I asked him, I said, so you loved me so much that you wanted to adopt me. So then you treated me poorly and threw me around? And he said, well, it's complicated. Okay. So unfortunately, in 2006, I was 28. My mom finally passed away. And once she did, he turned that switch again. He decided he was going to be that guy all over again. Well, I was 28 years old. That wasn't happening anymore. In fact, not long ago, I spoke to my sister on the phone, and she said, you'll never guess what my dad just said. He told her that I don't want to go to the city of Dayton and drive around because Wes is a cop. I made her repeat that a couple times. I appreciate that part. But I know if my mom could be here today, she'd probably be in the audience. In fact, she'd probably be sitting there waiting to speak after me about the advantages of the Artemis Center. Every day I deal with domestic violence, not as much as I deal with crashes, but I deal with domestic violence. And every victim, I make sure I refer them over to the Artemis Center because I did have a great experience there. It is a safe place to go. It is a safe place for people to communicate their problems and their pain without being judged and without having repercussions. So again, I'd like to thank you guys for coming this morning. Really like to thank Jane for having me out. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Officer, it's an honor to have you here this morning. I would like to now introduce Mr. David Yonkin. David served on the Artemis Center board for over 5 years and is a true servant leader. He leads by example and is not afraid to roll up his sleeves and lend a helping hand. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Yonkin.
Thank you, Gabby. I don't normally give speeches or teach classes. And to be honest, I'm a little nervous, but I'll persevere. As Gabby mentioned, I've been on the board for over 5 years, serving Artemis Center. Over several months, I was involved with making some much-needed improvements to the building. And it was my good fortune and great pleasure to get to know all the staff. I want you to know that this amazing group of people take their mission very seriously. They confront a very difficult problem with great dedication and compassion. I'd like to share with you, in part, how I became involved with Artemis Center, and I'll be brief. For about 25 years, I had a small business here in Dayton. Our first receptionist was Renee. Renee was a very nice person. She had a smile, cheerful greeting for us and our customers, and she helped things run smoothly most of the time. One day we began to see a change in Renee. Her warm smile and cheerful greeting began to fade. She would come in with bruises on her face, bruises on her arms, sometimes a black eye. Sometimes she would just lay her head down on her desk. As we began to realize what was happening, we urged her strongly to take her son and leave her abusive live-in boyfriend. We just couldn't understand why she couldn't do it. We didn't think it was our place to interfere in her personal life. Then came the day I took flowers to Renee at the hospital. She was semi-conscious, unable to speak. She never returned to work. We didn't know how to help her. I still feel guilty that I didn't know how to help her. Did you know that up to 60% of victims lose their jobs due to reasons stemming from domestic violence? That 8 million days of paid work are lost due to the abuse? That costs exceed $8.3 billion for lost productivity and medical treatment? A few years after I saw Renee for the last time, I saw an article in the newspaper about this wonderful organization, Artemis Center. Excuse me. Whose purpose is to help victims of domestic violence and their children get to safety, make it through the intimidating legal process, get needed counseling, receive support and tools to remain safe, and to help heal. Yep, you bet. I became a supporter immediately. You are all here today because you already care. You're here because you want to stand against domestic violence, because you don't want anyone to suffer physical abuse or mental or emotional abuse anymore. It's my pleasure and great honor to represent the board and ask you to support Artemis Center this morning. Your donations will help victims and their children in an urgent time of need. Your donations will help people like Renee and her son find safety and support. And everyone deserves to be safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And thank you to all of our speakers who so eloquently validated the reason we are all here today. So you've heard from our speakers, we've learned the widespread impact of domestic violence. Victimization affects the victim, their children, and the community at large, with the cost of injury felt also by the healthcare community, the workplace, and the criminal justice system, and society as a whole. We have learned victims of abuse live in a controlled life where they've been purposely put into a position of dependence, making it hard for the victim to break free. Abusers, they enjoy and employ isolating tactics such as preventing their spouse or partner from working or accessing a bank, credit card, or transportation. They might even tightly monitor and restrict their partner's spending. In the United States, an average of 20 people are physically abused by intimate partners every minute. That is more than 10 million abuse victims annually. Domestic violence fatalities in Ohio rose to 115 this year. That's up from 101 fatalities last year. Throughout the state, Montgomery County ranked third in domestic violence incidents reported in Ohio. According to the most recent Montgomery County Domestic Violence Death Review report from 2010, over 75% of local victims of domestic violence-related homicide did not have prior contact with a victim advocate. This is why Artemis Center's work is so critical to our community. Artemis Center provides a deeper level of support. Advocates create safety plans so clients understand how to keep themselves and their children safe, whether they decide to stay or leave the relationship. On average, Artemis Center provides services to more than 5,000 victims of domestic violence and their children annually at no charge. These services provide safety, counseling, education, and hope to victims of domestic violence and their children. But most importantly, these services save lives. In order for Artemis Center to continue offering these much-needed services at no charge to victims and their families, we have come to you, the community. We are asking for your support that allows Artemis to continue providing these life-saving services to victims and their children. These services are vital in our fight to break the cycle of domestic violence in our community. In conjunction with the National Purple Purse Challenge sponsored by Allstate, your donations can help Artemis Center win up to $100,000 in grant challenge funds. Last year, with your help, Artemis raised over $70,000. This earned Artemis fourth place in the challenge, therefore receiving $30,000 in grant prize money. We know with your help, we will surpass last year's fourth place finish. To make your donation part of the challenge, you can donate right now with your mobile device, which you know we all have one, by simply going to artemiscenter.org and clicking the orange button that says Donate Now. Or you can fill out the pledge card or donation envelope that is on your table with your credit card information and donation amount. Please give the completed card to your table captain or Artemis advocate at your table. I know you've heard a lot of statistics, but these are really important as well. $50 pays to change a lock on a client's home to keep her family safe. $100 pays for 1 hour of therapy for a child who has witnessed domestic violence. And $500 pays for an Artemis advocate to accompany a client to court to navigate through the judicial process. Your generous donations make a difference for those seeking safety. Your generous donations make an impact to save lives. And our community needs Artemis, and Artemis needs you. Together, we will make a difference. Thank you for all your stories today. Thank you all for spending your morning with us. And please donate to the Artemis Center. Thank you again for being here.